Coogs House. Have you done your reading for book club?
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs Daily Podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Aintor, a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by. Thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. I appreciate you making us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Cougs. We're joining the conversation, but don't know what to say. Tell us in the comments down below about a favorite Hakeem Olajuwon memory of yours. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time, but more on that later. We're getting back into another episode of our book club with Mirin Fader. Last time we left off kind of in the middle of chapter 15, part of the book, as Akeem was starting to find himself with the help of Otis Birdsong. We pick back up with there today, as well as go all the way through, spoiler alert, his first championship run with the Houston Rockets, kind of how that journey takes a bunch of topsy-turvs and all kinds of things like that. But without further ado, let's bring on one Mirin Fader.
I just love this image of Otis and Hakeem going to Bible study together. And it doesn't mean anything about Olajuwon giving up his own religion. It just means being interested.
You love that image, and this is where you and I are different, because I love the image of the other random person at Bible study when Hakeem freaking Olajuwon walks in and goes,
no,
whoa.
Can you imagine? No, can you literally imagine? I think I would. This is like, I can't. This is like, yeah, I'm not going to compare it to something, but it's like going to your local, like, yoga class on a Tuesday and LeBron just decided to come through. Like it's
because he felt like stretching that day.
Right.
You know, and it's not like much like the LeBron anecdote. It's not like he can sneak into a Bible study.
Exactly.
He might not be 7 feet tall, but he's 6'10", right? Like right. He's not just sneaking into a place. Right. And I loved that, both because obviously it ties back to the U of H, but also I think it's important to understand that like he really was searching for things. Mm-hmm. Like he was going to places that I don't think people would have ever thought he was going to go to search for these things. And he ultimately ends up back in the mosque. And it weirdly feels like he finds suddenly a Muslim community in Houston more similar to what he had in Lagos. Yeah. Just in the sense that was a big deal in Lagos, where it wasn't in his life in Houston at that point. And it felt more like he was breaking away from the Houston he'd been at for a while there. And he'd done some like one in Rome kind of living in Houston, but he's weirdly making a connection to Lagos, or to his life in Lagos, right? In the mosque. What connections before we move on to the Hajj, I guess in 91 he takes a pilgrimage. What connections is he making in Houston before making that? Because I think I think one leads to the other.
Yeah, like on the first day he's in the mosque, like the sheikh gives him his number, gives him books to read. Again, books, we love books. Shout out to books. Like I just love that, like this idea of just community. And people were so shocked to see him. They were like, oh my God, I didn't know Hakeem was Muslim. You know, this was just not something that people knew. It's not like they knew he was Muslim and then they showed up and then, oh wow, you're back. Like it wasn't like that at all. I think like the way people helped him, I mentioned them by name and I don't want to butcher those names because I'm forgetting them right now because I wrote this book like a year ago. But if you go in this chapter,
that's the process for aspiring young writers. She wrote this book a year ago. It just came out as the recording of this last Tuesday.
I don't remember. It has been a process to reintroduce myself to my own work. There are just various people, and I shouted them out by name because, again, a community helped this person. That is the theme of the book. And so you have all of these people who invest in him very similarly that Moses did on the court. This is the way that people invested in him off the court. And they're not doing it because he's Hakeem Olajuwon, the star. They're like so moved that he wants to be deeper into his faith. And so they help him for no other reason out of the kindness of their hearts. They teach him everything. How do you know which direction to pray in when you're in a hotel room in a random NBA city? How do you know how to find a mosque when you're in a city, right? There's no Google Maps. It's like, oh, you're playing in Boston, I know this guy, it's on this street, go there, tell him I sent you, right? Like, it's just a very different world. It's so beautiful the way that the way he finds his community, because again, you're not just finding faith, you're not just finding solace in the words like in the Quran, you're meeting people, you're feeling part of something. Anybody who's religious knows what I'm talking about. You're feeling connected, you're feeling whole, you've got other things on your mind besides your job, your money, your family, your other things. There's like a whole new part of your life that is just blossoming everywhere. And it's just such a beautiful time for him. And to your early point about Legos, it just so reminded me, because when he went to that first service, he hears the call, which is, if you live in a Islamic country, the call is broadcasted throughout the city and it's the time to pray and all of these things. He hasn't heard that out loud in like a decade, right? That's his like favorite melody. Like, as a child, he's so used to it. It's beautiful. The whole city stops. It's wonderful the way he describes it. And so it's like all these years later that, again, the return, the rehearing, the melody that is still in your head, you hear it. It's a familiar song, not a new song. He's just like so moved to tears.
Well, and that leads us to three important things in this podcast that happened in 1991. One, I just figured out you were also born in 1991. Two, I was born in 1991. And three, he takes his pilgrimage. He Hajj back to Mecca. And in the book, I think you do a good job outlining too. Like, he makes connections to the metaphorical, although I guess also literal, village that raised him, having also done the same thing, right? What can you tell us about reporting, discovering, uncovering things about that part of his life? Because that's a big part for any Muslim person, but obviously a person that strays away and then comes back to it, it'd be a very big part of his as well, right?
Yeah, he's like so in awe that all these things that he's read about in the Quran for months, right? He's been studying for months for this. It's not like he goes on the Hajj immediately after that service. He's prepared for this. He's done a lot of work. He's learned. He's done a lot of studying, so many books, so many services, so many conversations. And he's so amazed that all the things he's reading about, the places that he's reading about, he's right there. He's standing right where, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is like having all of these, thoughts and revelations. And it's so fascinating to him that he's on like the actual land. And it's such a moving experience. He wakes up super early on one of the days to complete one of the tasks. You have to, go to various places and do various rituals. And he's just like, he's amazed that like there's all these people here in these, white garments, and everybody, it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, we're all here, we're all equal, we're all here to be closer to God. He loves this egalitarian part of it, this very moving sort of communal procession.
Right.
And so I think that that's really cool, because in his NBA life, he's rich, he's a star, he's famous. And then he goes there and nobody's like, oh my God, it's Hakeem Olajuwon. It's just like, okay, there's a tall man in our procession,
Right. He's just the tallest person there. That's not a big, right. Whatever.
Right.
It also was obviously, I mean, it would be for anyone, but incredibly transformative. One quip I think that leads to that is he comes back and he goes from saying, God will judge you for this call, to now talking about deep. But he has a different conversation with a rep in the 90s about tell me about your faith, like talking with the refs about their faith, and like diving a little deeper and trying to get to a deeper understanding. And like, that just doesn't sound like the same person.
God.
Like, there are moments like that throughout this. Is there one that sticks out to you as like, he's a completely different person?
Yes, that one for sure. Like, I believe it was Ed T. Rush, and they were talking about Christian versus Muslim. And, it's like the most profound exchanges you can ever have with somebody occur on a pickup basketball court, I swear. And this is like one of those moments between a free throw where you're just casually talking about the Christian versus Muslim faith with the ref. One of my favorites was the guy he punches in college at UCSB. I forgot his name. Scott Fisher. Fisher. It's his junior year in college. It's a very close game at UCSB. Jerry West happens to be attending this game, who I also interviewed. And it's a close game, and the UCSB has to foul because the situation, and he goes at Olajuwon, but Olajuwon is like, takes it like really offensively, and he punches Scott Fisher. Right. He's like, Fisher, you do that again, I will box you, or something. I forgot the quote, but it's in there. I talked to Scott Fisher for this book. Scott Fisher shows up 300 pages later. And the two are actually at the Olympics in the 96 Olympics. So a little moving ahead from where you are. And
Gonna get a quick pause in the action to about our buddies over at 5 Hour Energy, because we need the energy to get through that late night reading and get ready for book club, or get up ready and tailgate for that football game on Saturday. It's a late night kicking off at 6 o'clock, so good run late, I guess. Whatever the case may be, being a fan is not just a passion, it's a way of life. It takes a lot of energy to get through all of the things you got to do. And 5 Hour Energy is here for you along the way. I know I use 5 Hour Energy whenever I need to get through teaching, coaching, and podcasting, all the different things. I used it last Friday night to stay up for the Arizona game. It's just a great benefit to me in my life. I know it can be to you and yours. And 5 Hour Energy knows that no matter what team you root for, although let's be honest, it's the Cougs. Being a fan requires heart, soul, and a whole lot of energy. And whether you're prepping for the big tailgate or ironing your jersey, your game time to-do list is always a mile long. That's why the very limited edition Stand the Fan 5 Energy Shot is here to keep you fueled throughout the season. What's your fan fuel this week? Whatever it is, do it with a 5 Hour Energy. 5hourenergy.com ships nationwide.
Scott Fisher is playing for Australia. He is Australian, and he sees Olajuwon. He's like, "Oh my God, that's like Hakeem Olajuwon." We got into a fight as college kids, and he decides to just go up to him. And he's like, "Hakeem, I'm not sure if you remember me. I'm Scott Fisher. When we were in college, you punched me, and
which is a great conversation to have.
Imagine this conversation. And Olajuwon just looks like so sincere and so apologetic, and he takes Scott's hand and he's like, "I do, and I'm really, really sorry." And it's such a, like, we're laughing because it is hysterical, but really, like, from Scott's perspective, he was like so emotional and just very moved, the sincerity. And to me, that anecdote is the ultimate. He has changed. He has matured.
As he's changing in the 90s, I actually forget the year because the last 10 days have been a blur, but it is also around the same time as his first heart scare. And first of all, I think you detailed well how early these happened, because again, in my own ignorance or age or whatever, I don't guess I realized that they happened before the winning all happened. I think of them more as a late career thing.
Right.
And this happens, at least in the chronology of the story that we're telling here, it happens after the pilgrimage, but certainly, I mean, before Rudy T comes in the picture, right? I think that I have that right. Yeah. First of all, again, as you report this, holy crap, what's going on here when this happens? It's got to be a fairly significant detail to find. And then also, I want to ask about the fact that this happens after he returns to Islam has to be important in how he handles it, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So first of all, you find the story, and then like what?
I just remember being like, oh my God, like, so from a writerly standpoint, I just remember being like, oh my God, like, so much stuff is happening. It's a hard pivot from like Hajj to like blood clots. Like, it's just, there's, from a writer, it's just, I was like, oh my God, there's so much going on. Definitely from the people that were around at that time, they got the sense that he was looking so very, as anyone does with the health scare, you look very closely at your life. You think of life and death in a different way. And I think spiritually, because he was so solid and connected again, I definitely think, again, life was about so much more than basketball. Hakeem is never one of those athletes where you just know if they retire, they're going to have a hard time with it. I think this experience, which again, he did not retire after this, but it just reminded me, and I think others at the time, that if he had to, he would be okay, because basketball was not everything to him. He had other things. And so that's why maybe he coped with it better, because his life was not fully dependent on basketball.
And I just, again, like, I think that, and you mentioned maybe the janitor, the person cleaning the floor, maybe that was just a piece, and it would have always found his way back to Islam, or his faith and depth of it, or whatever. I can't imagine the story if that happens in like 88. Like I
Right.
can't like, and it's kind of just lucky happenstance that it didn't. It just changes how the story unfolds completely in a way that's just can't figure out what would have happened. It would have been different though. I don't know.
It's so interesting because I think this whole time in this book club, this awesomely rad book club, we've been talking about how there is this theme of chance and
Mhm.
accidental and myth, and by chance he ends up in Houston. What are the odds that doesn't happen? What are the odds he then continues his career in Houston? All these things. But the way he actually lives his life and his faith, he believes things are meant to happen the way that they are
Mhm.
supposed to happen. So he actually does not believe in chance or accidental. He believes like inshallah, like this, if God wills it, it will. If he doesn't, it won't. So I just
Well,
think that part is interesting.
and in the end, if God wills it, it will. He's also in contract disputes at this point that you
Right.
mentioned earlier in the book club. I actually don't know what episode that's going to end up in, but that he was very literally on the trade block at
Right.
one point. As much as it's hard to swallow as a fan,
Right.
um, it feels like, again, if that trade talk happens in 87 or 88, he might not handle it as well, I don't
Yeah.
think, right? Am I crazy to think that also would dramatically have shifted the story? I mean, that's a little less
Yeah.
random, but
No, I think so. I mean, that's again, that's another misconception. People thought that he wasn't getting back to Islam in that point because there was turmoil. Like they think, oh, he must have came back to it right before they won the title. No, he was like in route, in process.
yeah.
It's just things were still bad around him. It doesn't like magically just like the next day we won the championship.
It'd be quite a light switch to flip, though.
God, can you imagine?
Yeah, seriously. The book gets a lot happier very quickly in the next chapter. The next
Yeah.
chapter is clutch. At this point, they've shifted to Rudy T. I thought there were interesting quips. This is not Rudy T's not a Houston Cougar, so this initially a podcast a lot about him. But like Rudy, like doesn't want to be the coach at first.
Like no, like absolutely not.
Hakeem is back on the team for sure now. And you start talking to one Scott Brooks, who is not a Houston Cougar. But I always, I don't mean to say I forget about him, but I forget that it's the same Scott Brooks that would later become
Yes.
NBA head coach.
Nice
Very,
guy.
anyway, yeah, things go full circle. He then in 94 he wins MVP award and is genuinely like this very team first guy, and is in the most, I think it's become a little cliche, you hear it more often than not, like whether it's the real MVP speech or the whatever, but he's very quick to deflect and give the credit to elsewhere and etc. In a way that does feel full circle, as in like, okay, he really, and I think that's why people connect, as you mentioned, that the return to Islam must have happened right before the winning, because that's very clearly a moment that 88 Akeem doesn't have, right? And so I guess in reporting on the 94 season, were there moments that stuck out to you as well, like, okay, this guy's a different guy, or is it really as you get to the winning? Because I do want to talk about, first of all, the final series and so on, but is it apparent in covering the 94 season 30 years later that it was a new person, and that's a big part of this?
Yeah, because think about how many times that team got down and looked like they were going to be out of the playoffs, and to see the way that he was so calm and confident and disciplined and didn't let people get under his skin, it just felt like no, like I worked a decade to get here. Like I'm not squandering this opportunity. And I think it's because he just wasn't worried. Every time they got down and his teammates were a little stressed, he was like, "Guys, we got this." And there was just an inner peace and calmness that just radiated to everyone.
Quick pause in the action to tell you about our guys over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Help you out with the NFL this season. If you put down a $5 bet and it hits, they give you $100 back in bonus bets, all in one place. The NFL app, you can check with the FanDuel app. You check down things in the NFL, live game time stats, play-by-play action, and more on the same place that you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join in on the action today. You can start with $150 back in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I also want to tell you about our buddies over at Game Time. They bring you today's episode because they're bringing you each and every game, concert, movie, theater, event, anything you're trying to go to. They can help you get the best tickets in the house for the best prices possible. I love the lowest price guarantee. I get a ticket on Game Time. If I find a ticket somewhere else for less that's in the same section in a row, Game Time gives me back 110% of the difference. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy possible with Game Time. Make sure you check them out. They got a new Game Time Picks function to help you find the best value in the stadium, arena, or more. So make sure you download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. I want to talk, and chapter 17 is all about the finals and what happens after the finals. And so I want to talk some about the finals and what happens after the finals, even though that's a very Rocket-centric show. And I guess technically this is a Houston Cougar-centric show. You also talked to Justin Gatlin, I think, at some point, and Justin's a good guy. And I frankly, I enjoy listening to him as a fan as much as a coworker. But he does Locked on Rockets. I guess I should have probably prefaced it with that. First of all, you got to talk to Chris Herring, who wrote the book on the 90s Knicks, which is the opposite side of this story.
I think New Yorkers hate me.
But I want to ask you, because if we're pushing books, The Blood in the Garden is a great book.
Oh, my God.
And he did extensive reporting on those 90s Knicks.
Right.
What was it like to be doing reporting with someone who's done the other side of the story? Because the book's a lot about like getting so close, right? He did the 90s Knicks in a way that feels similar. They're just and the paths cross over, but obviously you get to talk about the victors in yours, and he does not. So what was working with Chris like on that?
Well, I definitely encourage everyone to buy his book. So good. So full disclosure, Chris is like one of my best friends. And
I didn't know if you wanted to say that part of it, so I'm going to put that. You guys are very clearly friends.
That's my bestie. He was writing his Knicks book when I was writing my Giannis book, and so every day we'd message each other like, "Oh man, this section sucks. Like, how are you doing? Did you get anything good today?" And so I've seen his book through, progression, and then I read it and blurbed it, and then I reread the book for this project. So I think I've read that book like 4 times. So I was like very intimately familiar with it. I think that he does such a good job with like personalities and like Anthony Mason, like people that I just really didn't know about. And I, Blood in the Garden, you feel yourself rooting for the Knicks, which is weird for me because again,
you also wrote this book, right?
Yeah, and it's like I'm kind of like how I really kind of felt for Milwaukee fans. I really feel for the Houston fans that felt like, oh, we never win, we never did. So I'm like internally like on Houston's side right now, and working with that book, I felt the hopes of the Knicks just continually just churning and coming up short. And so it's kind of like having both of these same personalities in my head at once. But it was such an honor to cite Chris because I know what happened in the series, but he brings you to the series where you feel like it's happening in 2024.
It's a great book and a great read, and it was just interesting to talk with him reading you talking with him in the book was interesting because you mentioned him as a reporter, and the book is reporting, but it's also like he did that much work and report, like kind of exactly. where that all comes. You also, and this is not just because of the timing of our recording, you mentioned a rather large sandwich that was sold in New York City. that I was wondering if
All coming back to me.
there was the Hakeem sandwich, I believe, sold at Carnegie Deli there in New York, and it had like a little bit of everything. That was part of the theme, is the same way that Hakeem Olajuwon does everything. In your reporting, did you find where I can find one of those sandwiches? Can I find a massive sandwich with every type of New York deli meat on it anywhere?
You know what's so funny? Like, I wanted so badly to get to the bottom of this, kind of like the man sweeping the floor. Like, I reached out to Jelly. I reached out. The guy's name was like Marty Trachtenberg or something, and I believe he passed. And I tried to find a family member. It was a disaster. It's really just like you could spend a day on just trying to figure out one nugget. Never heard back on the sandwich. So sad. But I wouldn't have found out about that unless I had looked through the newspaper archives. So this is a definite like kudos to the journalism of that era.
Definitely. This final series is important because it's Akeem Olajuwon winning the finals, and I want to talk about really almost more about what happens after the finals. But in an earlier game, the series goes to 7. In an earlier game, it is kind of cemented in American history for things that happen across the country. The O.J. Simpson car chase, the White Ford Bronco, happens in the middle of an NBA Finals game. So much so that, as you mentioned in your reporting, Rockets players are kind of like, "What's going on?" Like while the game is happening, right? And so I guess in reporting this, what interesting tidbits could you pull out of the fact that these are, one is an American historic event happening simultaneously with kind of this like supreme moment in Akeem Olajuwon's life?
Well, to be honest, goes back to Chris, because I thought he did that so well that I was like, you know what, Chris already like really got into that. I'm gonna mention it in passing and not go in too much into it, because he did such a good job that I felt like, what his book is really the definitive source on that moment. But I thought it was just so hilarious. Like players were watching it at like halftime, and it's just there's these moments that I'm reporting this book, and I'm like, this is such a different era, right? Like reporters can go to bars and talk to players, like the OJ chases, and everybody's turning to it during there's just all these moments where you're like, wow, a different era.
It's a fascinating piece of this that will always make whether it's Pat Riley or whatever scene from Madison Square Garden stick out as like the opposite end of the country from what's happening in LA. So they, spoiler alert, they win the finals. They win Game 7. And I think it's interesting in the build up to that, because it's hard to read this as if there's a surprise, because we know that they win the finals. But throughout the day, throughout the lead up to Game 7, there's all the anecdotes of other players nervous. And you mentioned Akeem Olajuwon's attitude is kind of just like, inshallah. Like he's just like, if it happens, it happens. If we're supposed to win, we're going to win. Like he's not worried about it at all.
Right.
Obviously, that is not a thing that the straightaway Akeem Olajuwon would have done. But can you speak to, because it's easy to say that after the fact when they've won.
Yeah.
But in the reporting, clearly that's actually what he was feeling like, right? That's not just like, oh, of course he felt like that because they won. He actually was like, if it's supposed to happen, it's going to happen, right?
Yeah, like Mario Ellie was a great interview for the book, and he mentioned this anecdote about, I think they were down 3-2, and they were feeling really nervous, and he just goes up to Hakeem's room, and he's like, Mario, what's wrong? And he's like, I don't know, Dream, like we're going through it, and he's like, it'll be okay, don't worry. And it's just such a genuine, like, he meant it. He really meant it. But that's what I mean when I say that he had a higher calling. So life is bigger than basketball. You're secure because you're already secure in yourself, whether you win or lose. Because the goal in your life, yes, you want to win, but like you have higher goals in life too.
Then they win. And the crazy party starts happening on the floor. Chaos is breaking out in Houston, as you outlined. It's like the first title of significance, certainly in the 4 major Americans, but I guess you could technically talk about like the arrows or whatever. Like you briefly allude to, like Houston's not a city that's won a whole lot before this, right? Mm-hmm. And Olajuwon, as people are going crazy, is like sitting and reflecting. And then as the era of beer in locker rooms, as you point out, Olajuwon pours out his champagne after the game because he can't drink it, and he's not really supposed to give it away either.
Right.
Right. He gets a different championship ring because he's not supposed to have gold. Right. So he gets a
Mhm.
special, unique championship ring.
Mhm.
It's truly a like different experience for him than really, I would argue, any athlete before or since. I don't mean to like if there's a Muslim athlete that I'm forgetting or that has these same kind of quips out there that I would know. I should probably know that, but it feels incredibly unique to his story. Every aspect of from the moment the buzzer sounds until the start of the next season. And I guess I want to ask, what was your favorite one? As someone who I think it comes through in the book, admires him as much as I do.
Mhm.
What was your favorite moment of this gigantic celebration? Because it's all so uniquely Olajuwon. Coogs House. All right. So we're getting pretty far along here, right? I got through chapter 18 today, got through when he wins a ring, and he has his own unique way to go about it. It's the most Hakeem Olajuwon way possible. We're going to pick back up with that celebration, what that means, and go on into the rest of his NBA career and more after in our next and I believe final book club, if we're putting things together correctly with Mirin. So make sure you check us out next week. Keep up with that. Hope you're enjoying the book along the way. It makes a great Christmas gift to any Houston Cougar, Houston sports fan, or just basketball fan or fan of cool stories in general. So go check that out. We have the link to the book in the show notes as well. So make sure you get that if you haven't for a loved one this holiday season. Locked On Cougs, the primary of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.